our cameras captured the moment the former president arrived at federal court in Miami. His motorcade, as you can see, went into an underground entrance. This, of course, a very historic moment. Donald Trump is the first former president to be indicted on federal charges.
Now, we have live team coverage of this historic arraignment. Evening anchor Todd McDermott, Taylor Hernandez, and Terry Parker are all in Miami outside the federal courthouse. Angela Rozier is live in Doral, where supporters of the former president gathered today. And Steve King is live near Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort on Palm Beach.
And we're going to start with our co-anchor Todd McDermott. Todd, the former president was in the same courtroom today with the man who unveiled the indictment against him.
And that was a surprise to some, Shane. Again, Special Counsel Jack Smith was there. The former president, Donald Trump, arrived here at the federal courthouse in downtown Miami about 10 minutes before 2 o'clock. By 2 o'clock or so, he had been booked as a federal defendant. And then came that hearing, that arraignment at 3 o'clock. It lasted about 47 minutes in total. He came face to face with Special Counsel Jack Smith, did not make eye contact with him, never said a word to him. In fact, Donald Trump said nothing during that 47-minute hearing. Again, the former president here to answer those 37 criminal charges filed against him. Attorney General Merrick Garland had appointed Smith back in November, about the same time Donald Trump became a presidential candidate again, but this investigation goes back far longer than that. The former president's attorney, Todd Blanche, entered the not guilty plea for him to all charges in connection with the alleged willful retention and hiding of top classified records while obstructing justice and lying to federal investigators, and his refusal to return those documents after they were requested when he left the White House in 2021. Trump officially surrendered around 2 o'clock, as I said, at the courthouse. His co-defendant, Walt Nauta, former White House valet and now a Trump employee, traveled with the former president in a separate car, but did not file a plea in his case. Again, he is an alleged co-conspirator in this case. During his arraignment, Donald Trump and his attorneys appeared in front of Judge Jonathan Goodman, a magistrate who will not hear the actual hearings going forward. That will be Judge Aileen Cannon. Former president's 37 criminal charges include those 31 counts of willful retention of national defense and top secret documents, a count of conspiracy, count of obstructing justice, and more. A possible sentence, should there be a conviction, would be decades in length. Trump's scheduled to return to his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club shortly. As you just saw, if you've been watching ABC, he made what amounts to a campaign stop at the Versailles restaurant in Little Havana after leaving the courthouse here, but will soon be back on his plane, headed to New Jersey for the next step in this, which is a fundraiser tonight where he'll give more extensive remarks, although he did say it's going good to his supporters at that restaurant, Versailles in Little Havana. Dozens of the president's supporters, former president's supporters, here at the courthouse today. Not the madding crowds that people predicted. There may have been 100, perhaps a couple of hundred supporters in all. They were here mostly to show support for Donald Trump. There were his detractors and critics as well. We're going to go to Taylor Hernandez here, also on the grounds at the courthouse, for the reaction she got from the people she talked with. Taylor?
Well, Todd, as you just said, the former president pleaded not guilty. Certainly, the majority of the protesters, supporters here this afternoon agree the president is not guilty. You know, you said about 200, 300 supporters here this afternoon. It's a pretty fair assessment. My photographer and I pulled up right as the motorcade was arriving. Folks lining the streets with signs and banners and flags. But of course, there were also some counter supporters, those who believe this indictment was warranted. For the most part, things here were peaceful. There were no physical altercations, but we did see several different verbal scuffles. A lot of the people we talked to that were for the president, in support of the former president, believe this investigation was a witch hunt from the beginning. Their goal in this investigation was to keep the former president off of the Republican ticket in 2024. However, those on the other side of the argument say no one is above the law. We spoke with several people on both sides of the aisle here today. Again, things mostly remaining peaceful, no physical altercations. The crowd has really started to thin out. The former president just left here in his motorcade within the past hour to go to Little Havana here in Miami. Since he left, a lot of his supporters have left as well. Still some out here with signs and flags, but things seem to be calming down here at the federal courthouse in Miami. I'm live in Miami. Taylor Hernandez, WPBF 25 News. I want to send things back to you, Todd.
All right, Taylor, thank you very much. And again, the former president had exhorted his followers and supporters to come out here to downtown Miami today, but it was a comparatively small number, again, that 200 to 300 range. They were enthusiastic, but not the large crowds that some had expected. I want to go to Doral now. Trump left his own golf club that bears his name in Doral after arriving there yesterday. That's where we were last night. Angela Rozier was there as the former president left. Angela, what did you see there today while Mr. Trump was still at the golf club?
Well, I can tell you there was a heavy police presence and some supporters, but as you can see now, no more police and no supporters at this time here in Doral. I want to show you some video that we shot earlier today when we arrived here. Now, this is what the scene looked like Tuesday afternoon outside the Trump National Golf Club. Supporters showed up, again with their flags, again chanting for the president, and again the former president, and again they said out here saying that he is not guilty. They say that they wanted to catch a glimpse of him as he left his resort heading for that federal courthouse for his arraignment related to those unclassified document case. Now, supporters held signs up here. One was reading Make America Back, Take America Back. There was also one lady who told me that she showed up from Las Vegas, Nevada to show her support and to hopefully get a glimpse.
This is a banana republic. The only reason they're doing that is because they're scared of this man, because they know that he wants to clean the swamp and get rid of all those old folks that need to go.
Did you see him in the car?
Absolutely, I did.
Did he see you?
He was waving, so I'm gonna go with yes.
And we understand that the U.S. Secret Service also here coordinating with Doral Police as well as Miami-Dade Police to make sure that this area was secure and to make sure they had a perimeter set up. They have gone for now, and also there were no supporters for Biden here today like there were yesterday. It was pretty quiet and small group of supporters here today. Back to you, Todd.
All right, Angela, thank you. That's Angela Rozier live in Doral. I want to go now to Terry Parker to go back to what happens following this arraignment again. The former president pleading not guilty to those 37 counts. But Terry, we need to talk about what happens with this case and a trial possibly going forward.
That's exactly right, Todd. The eyes of the world are right here on this federal courthouse in Miami. And we did speak to some legal experts to try to find out what happened inside the courtroom and where do we go from here. Former President Donald Trump arrived in his motorcade around 2 p.m., entering the courtroom unseen. As we know, there are no cameras or audio recordings allowed inside. As is typical in federal court, it wasn't just for his case. Although several media outlets, including ABC News, asked a magistrate to allow video given this was such a historic moment. That motion denied. Another thing we're not going to see as this trial moves forward are the classified documents at the heart of these charges. I talked to attorney Richard Serafini about that aspect and why they remain secret.
It's really unlikely that during the course of trial, secret documents that are the centerpiece of an espionage charge are going to be published and released to the public. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of bringing the charge in the first place.
Right, and that is the nature of these charges, that Mr. Trump allegedly showed some of these documents to people who did not have classification status. He also kept them stored in places where anyone could have conceivably stumbled upon them. However, the indictment does spell out in fairly big detail how much these documents did contain sensitive information about our national secrets, war plans, nuclear systems, all of that. So as the trial continues, however, we will not be getting discovery. This is when the prosecutors and the defense file their evidence. That doesn't happen in federal court for the public like it does in regular circuit court. So when these filings do become public, we'll just have to go by what motions are made public and report them as it happens. Todd, back to you.
All right, Terry, thank you very much. Now, again, the 37 counts, not guilty plea today, but Donald Trump did sign the terms of his release today, which state he cannot talk to potential witnesses in this case going forward. That would be including several lawyers who worked for him, who have since testified under oath about what he told them, and many of his former aides, even some who worked for him in the White House. Again, he's been ordered not to have any contact with them about this case going forward. Let's talk about the case and the possible trial that may not start for a year or more, depending on who you talk to, and could go beyond the 2024 election. Steve King is joining me now to break down that part of the story. Steve?
Todd, we're here outside of Mar-a-Lago where we haven't seen any supporters. We did hear one or two cars honking and yelling their support for former President Trump as they drove by, but mostly quiet here, as expected, with most of those supporters in Miami-Dade County for Trump's arrest and initial appearance. But here are some things to keep in mind as this case moves forward. Like you said, Todd, constitutional experts say that even if he is convicted of any of the crimes listed in the criminal federal indictment, Trump would still be able to run for president and serve as president if he's elected in 2024. Experts say if Trump is elected president, he could get the case dropped by the DOJ by appointing a new attorney general if the Senate confirms that appointment. He could also pardon himself if he's convicted and then elected. Now, if he's convicted and Biden or another Democrat wins the presidency, experts say there would likely be a large amount of political pressure for that president to pardon Trump to dispel any misconceptions that this federal investigation was politically motivated. Legal experts also say if Trump was convicted and sentenced to jail time, it would likely be far less than any maximum sentencing guidelines. And Todd, just as you said, again, it could be about a year or two before any possible trial in this case. Todd, let's send it back to you in Miami.
All right, Steve King at Mar-a-Lago on Palm Beach. Thank you, Steve. Again, Donald Trump scheduled to speak with supporters tonight in New Jersey at his Bedminster Country Club in New Jersey. That's scheduled for about 8:15. There's a campaign fundraiser going on. Politics still surrounding this in many ways, including that stop at the Versailles restaurant to see his supporters after a very glum and silent Donald Trump was in court just before arriving there. We're updating our website and our WPBF 25 News app for the latest information on this case going forward for you. You can access those anytime. We've also posted the full 49-page indictment online, something that the special counsel himself, Jack Smith, asked Americans to read for themselves to see the gravity of the charges against the former president. We'll also send push alerts to your devices with any updates on this case going forward, and there's lots more to come, including more of the political implications involved with this case and what happened today during the arraignment. For now, I'm Todd McDermott, live at the federal courthouse in Miami. Let's go back to Shane and Tiffany in the studio.
All right, Todd, thank you. And we did just receive sketches from Donald Trump's court appearance from earlier today. There were no cameras allowed in court, so we have these sketches here. Again, Trump's lawyer entering a not guilty plea on his behalf. We're told that the former president remained silent throughout his entire court appearance.